In the frozen heart of a Wyoming winter, 73-year-old Martha Colby makes a discovery that will shatter 5 decades of silence. 2 horses locked together in ice just beyond her barn door appear like statues from another time. When she brings them inside and the frost begins to melt away, she notices something impossible. One horse bears a brand she recognizes from her wedding day. The other carries markings that vanish and reappear like ghosts beneath its thawing coat. As warmth returns to their bodies, the animals behave as though they remember her, as though they've been waiting all these years. What Martha doesn't know yet is that these horses hold the key to her husband's final secret, one that connects 3 generations, a missing fortune, and a truth the whole town conspired to bury. What really happened the night her husband disappeared into that blizzard 50 years ago? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, hungry and cold, scraping across the high plains of Wyoming with nothing to slow it but Martha Colby's barn and the fence posts that marked her land. She stood at her kitchen window, a cup of coffee cooling between her palms, watching the early morning light turn the snow-covered fields from blue to pale gold. 73 years old, and she still woke before dawn. Some habits, her mother used to say, were written into your bones. The ranch had been in Henry's family for 4 generations, before it became hers through marriage and then through widowhood. 50 years now since that night. 50 years of running this place alone, of making decisions that should have been shared, of lying in a bed that felt too wide and too cold. The house still carried traces of him in unexpected places. A coat hook he'd installed crooked because he'd been laughing at something she'd said. The 3rd step on the staircase that creaked only if you stepped on the left side. His reading glasses in a drawer she couldn't bring herself to empty. Martha set down her coffee and pulled on her boots. The animals needed tending, regardless of memory or weather. She wrapped herself in layers, the thick canvas coat with the fleece collar, the scarf Sarah had knitted last Christmas, gloves that had been patched twice but still kept her fingers warm. The thermometer outside the kitchen door read 14 degrees. Not the coldest morning she'd seen, not by half. The barn was 100 yards from the house, a distance that felt longer every winter. Her breath formed clouds that hung in the still air. The snow crunched under her boots with that particular sound it only made in deep cold, each step breaking through the top crust. She'd cleared the path yesterday, but the wind had drifted snow back across it during the night. She was halfway to the barn when she saw them. 2 shapes, dark against the white expanse, positioned just beyond the barn's eastern wall where the fence line ran. At first, she thought someone had abandoned equipment. But as she came closer, the shapes resolved into something that made her stop walking entirely. Horses. 2 horses. Standing so close together, they seemed to be one animal with too many legs. And they weren't moving. Martha approached slowly. The horses were completely encased in ice, a thick coating that caught the rising sun and threw it back in fractured rainbows. They stood pressed against each other, one's head lowered to the other's withers, the other's neck arched as if in mid-turn. The ice held them in a posture that spoke of seeking warmth, of companionship in the face of freezing death. She walked around them, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing. How long had they been here? The storm 3 days ago had been fierce, temperatures dropping to 0, but this much ice suggested they'd been standing here longer than that. And why hadn't she seen them before? She walked this path twice daily to check the fence line. Martha reached out and laid her bare hand against the ice. It was thick, several inches at least, and beneath it she could see the dark hide of the horse, strands of mane frozen mid-wave. She pulled off her glove and touched the ice again, feeling its bitter cold burn her palm. Then she saw it. Visible through the layers of frost on the nearest horse's flank, a mark that made her heart lurch sideways in her chest. A brand, clear as anything despite the ice. The Colby brand, but not the one they'd used for the past 45 years. This was the old brand, the one Henry's father had designed. The one they'd retired after Henry disappeared because Martha couldn't bear to see it anymore. A circle with a cross through it and a small star in the upper right quadrant. The Phantom brand, they'd called it, because Henry's father claimed it represented the North Star that guided their family to this valley. She stepped back, her breath coming faster now. This was impossible. No one had used that brand since 1975. These horses couldn't be that old. Couldn't be standing here frozen in ice like some kind of monument to the past. Martha looked toward the house, then back at the horses. The sensible thing would be to call someone. Doc Walsh, maybe, or Tom Hendricks from the neighboring property. But something stopped her. This felt private somehow, like a message meant only for her eyes. She made her decision. The horses needed to be brought inside before the next storm hit. The forecast called for more snow by evening, another system moving down from Canada. If they were going to thaw, if there was any chance they could be saved, it had to be now. Martha walked back to the barn and found the come-along, the chains, and the heavy tarp. She'd moved cattle before, and once, memorably, a fully grown bull that had decided to lie down in the wrong place. She could move 2 frozen horses. It took her 2 hours. 2 hours of careful work, of wrapping chains around ice-locked legs, of using the come-along to drag the frozen mass inch by inch across the snow. Her back screamed at her. Her shoulders burned. Twice she had to stop and rest, leaning against the barn wall with her eyes closed, waiting for her heart to stop hammering quite so hard. But she was stubborn. That's what Sarah always said. Stubborn as a mule and twice as ornery when you tried to tell her she couldn't do something. By the time she got them inside the barn, the sun was fully up and her hands were shaking from exertion. She positioned them in the largest stall, the one that used to hold Henry's prize quarter horse back when they ran cattle. The stall had good drainage and plenty of space. She spread fresh straw around them and hung heat lamps from the rafters, positioning them carefully to provide warmth without direct heat that might damage frozen tissue. Then she stood back and looked at what she'd done. 2 horses, still locked in their icy embrace, steam beginning to rise from them as the barn's warmth started its slow work. In the better light, she could see more details. The second horse, the one without the brand, had a coat that seemed to shimmer strangely under the ice. Dark in some places, lighter in others, with markings that didn't quite make sense. She stepped closer, studying the patterns. They almost looked like words or symbols, but the ice distorted everything. Martha pulled an old wooden chair from the tack room and sat down outside the stall. She needed to catch her breath, needed to think. The smart thing, the reasonable thing, would be to call Doc Walsh now. He'd been the town veterinarian for 40 years, had delivered half the foals in the county, and he'd been Henry's friend. But something made her hesitate. That brand, the way Walsh had looked at her after the funeral, like he wanted to say something, but couldn't quite bring himself to do it. She pulled off her gloves and flexed her fingers. On her right hand, she wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck these days, her fingers having grown too thin to hold it properly. But on her left hand, she wore Henry's ring. She'd started wearing it 5 years after he disappeared, after they'd finally held the memorial service. It was a simple gold band, worn smooth by years of work, but inside it had an engraving. She'd never understood it. A series of numbers that didn't match their anniversary, their birthdays, or anything else she could figure out. Just numbers that Henry had insisted on having engraved there. The ice was melting faster now. Water dripped from the horses' legs, pooled in the straw, ran in small rivers toward the drain. Martha watched the process with a rancher's practical eye, looking for signs of injury or damage. The horses' eyes were still closed. Were they dead? They had to be. Nothing could survive being frozen solid like that. But then why go to all this trouble? Why did she feel deep in her gut that these animals mattered? An hour passed, then another. Martha made herself get up and finish her morning chores. The chickens needed feeding. The water troughs needed checking. Life on a ranch didn't stop for mysteries or impossible discoveries. But she kept coming back to the stall, kept watching the ice slowly surrender to warmth. It was almost noon when she heard the truck. Sarah's old Ford, the one that burned oil and needed the passenger door forced open, came rattling up the drive. Martha met her at the barn door, suddenly uncertain whether to show her granddaughter what she'd found. Sarah climbed out, wrapped in a puffy jacket that made her look younger than her 28 years. She had Henry's height and Martha's dark eyes, and a streak of determination that came from both sides of the family. "Grandma, why didn't you answer your phone?" "I've been calling all morning." "Left it in the house," Martha said. "You've been busy." Sarah looked at her grandmother's face, then at the barn behind her. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Martha almost laughed at that. "Maybe I have. Come on. I need you to tell me I'm not losing my mind." She led Sarah into the barn, to the large stall where the horses stood. The ice had melted enough now that their true forms were visible. 2 horses, one a dark bay with the phantom brand clear on its flank, the other a grey with those strange shifting markings. They still stood pressed together, still hadn't moved, but now Martha could see their sides rising and falling. Shallow breaths. Impossibly they were breathing. Sarah stopped so suddenly Martha almost ran into her. "Grandma, what is this?" "I found them this morning, frozen solid outside the barn. I brought them in. That's impossible. They should be dead." "They should be." Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Is that Grandpa's brand? The old one?" "It is," Martha said quietly. She stepped into the stall, moving slowly so as not to startle the animals if they were truly alive. Up close, she could hear their breathing more clearly now. Soft, steady, like they were simply sleeping. "I need you to look at something else." She pointed to the second horse, the grey. In the hours since she'd brought them in, the markings had become more visible as the ice melted away. They weren't natural patterns. They looked almost deliberate, like someone had painted symbols onto the horse's coat, or branded them in some strange way that left no scar, only color. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it across the grey's flank. "These look like, I don't know, letters maybe? Or numbers." Martha hadn't wanted to say it out loud, hadn't wanted to sound foolish, but Sarah saw it too. "That was something. I thought I was imagining things. You should call Doc Walsh." "I know, Grandma." "I will. I wanted to understand it first. Before everyone starts asking questions I don't have answers to." Sarah looked at her grandmother with that expression she got sometimes, the one that said she understood more than Martha gave her credit for. "This is about Grandpa, isn't it? That's why you're hesitating." Martha didn't answer right away. She reached out and placed her hand on the bay's shoulder, feeling the warmth returning to its body, the slight tremor of muscle beneath the hide. "That brand was retired the day after they called off the search. I couldn't stand to see it on the cattle. Couldn't stand the reminder every time I rode out to check the herd. Your grandfather designed it with his father when he was 16 years old. He was so proud of it. I remember you telling me that story. These horses, if they're wearing that brand, they'd have to be at least 50 years old. Horses don't live that long, Sarah. The oldest horse on record made it to 62, and that was exceptional. These animals look to be in their prime, 8, maybe 10 years old if I had to guess." Sarah moved around to the other side of the stall, examining the horses from a different angle. She'd always been methodical like that, looking at problems from multiple perspectives before forming an opinion. She got that from her mother, Martha's daughter Rebecca, who'd passed 5 years ago from cancer. The loss still felt fresh some days. What if someone found the old branding iron? Used it recently? Why? And why leave them here to freeze? Why not just turn them loose on my property if someone wanted to play a cruel joke? Maybe it wasn't a joke. Maybe it was a message. That thought had occurred to Martha too, though she didn't like it. A message implied someone knew something about Henry, about what happened that night. For 50 years, the story had been simple. Henry Colby went out in a blizzard to check on cattle and never came back. They found his truck 3 miles from the house, empty, doors frozen open. They searched for 2 weeks. Found nothing. Eventually, the county declared him legally dead, and Martha collected on his life insurance policy. That money saved the ranch, kept it going through the hardest years. But there had always been whispers. Small towns were good at whispers. Some people said he'd run off, that ranch life had gotten to be too much. Others said he'd had gambling debts or a woman on the side. Martha knew better. Henry had loved this place more than anything except her. He wouldn't have left it. Wouldn't have left her. "I'm calling Doc Walsh," Sarah said, pulling out her phone. "Whatever this is, we need help." Martha nodded. She was about to step out of the stall when the bay horse's eyes opened. Just like that, no warning, no gradual awakening. One moment they were closed, the next they were open and looking directly at her. Brown eyes, clear and intelligent, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her catch her breath. The horse made a soft sound, not quite a whinny, more like a greeting. Then it did something that made Martha's knees go weak. It lowered its head and touched its nose to her chest, right where Henry's ring hung on its chain beneath her shirt. The horse held that position for a long moment, breathing against her, and Martha could have sworn she felt recognition in that touch, like the animal knew her, like it had been waiting for her. "Grandma!" Sarah's voice came from behind her, shaky now. "The other one. Look at the other one." The grey horse's eyes were open too, and as Martha watched, the markings on its coat began to shift. Not dramatically, not like something from a movie. Just a subtle rearrangement, like puzzle pieces sliding into place. And there, clear as daylight now that she knew to look for it, she saw numbers. The same numbers engraved inside Henry's wedding ring. Martha fumbled for the chain around her neck, pulled it out so the ring hung visible against her shirt. Her hands shook as she held it up, comparing the numbers engraved inside the band to the markings on the grey horse's flank. They matched, exactly. A sequence that had never made sense to her. 42.8734. 108.7891. "What are those numbers?" Sarah asked, moving to stand beside her grandmother.
"I don't know."
"Henry had them engraved in his ring before we got married. Said they were important, but he never told me why. I asked him once, years into our marriage, and he just smiled and said I'd understand someday." Martha's voice caught. "I never did." Sarah had her phone out, typing rapidly. "Grandma, these look like coordinates. Latitude and longitude. Coordinates to what? I don't know yet, but—" "Hold on." More typing, then Sarah's face went pale in the blue light of her screen. "They point to somewhere about 40 miles from here. Up in the mountains near the old mining district." The mining district. Martha felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the temperature. Henry's father had been involved in mining before the ranch became profitable enough to sustain the family. There had been a copper mine, she remembered, that closed down when she and Henry were still newlyweds. Something about an accident, though Henry never wanted to talk about it. Before she could respond, they heard another vehicle coming up the drive. Through the barn's small window, Martha saw Doc Walsh's truck, the one with the veterinary practice logo on the door. Sarah must have called him while Martha was lost in thought. "I didn't call him yet," Sarah said, frowning. They stepped out of the barn to meet him. Doc Walsh climbed out slowly, moving with the careful deliberation of a man in his 70s who'd spent too many years bent over examining animals. He'd been old when Martha was young, or so it had seemed. Now he looked ancient, though his eyes were still sharp behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Martha," he said, his voice tight. "Tom Hendricks called me. Said he saw you dragging something into your barn this morning. Said it looked like livestock. Tom should mind his own business. In a town this size, everything is everyone's business. You know that." Walsh looked past her toward the barn. "What did you find?" Martha considered lying, but what was the point? Walsh would see for himself soon enough. 2 horses. Frozen solid when I found them this morning. They're thawing now." Walsh's face did something complicated, an expression Martha couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe. Or recognition. "Show me." They walked back into the barn, and Martha led him to the stall. The horses were both standing now, still close together but alert. The bay whickered softly when it saw Martha. The grey simply watched with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Walsh stopped at the stall door. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared at the horses like he was seeing ghosts. Then he spoke, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Where did you find them?" "Just outside the barn. Eastern fence line." And you brought them in yourself? Yes, Martha. Walsh turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart beat faster. Something that looked like guilt. You need to leave this alone. Leave what alone? I found 2 horses that should be dead. One of them has my husband's brand, the one we stopped using 50 years ago. The other has coordinates on its hide that match numbers Henry had engraved in his wedding ring. So you tell me, Doc, what exactly should I be leaving alone? Walsh glanced at Sarah, then back to Martha. Can we talk privately? Anything you say to me, you can say in front of my granddaughter. He shook his head. You don't understand. This isn't. There are things about Henry's disappearance that you don't know. Things that were better left buried. Then maybe it's time they got dug up. Walsh pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he put them back on, he looked older somehow, more tired. Do you remember the mine accident? The one in 1974? I remember Henry didn't want to talk about it. There were reasons for that. Good reasons. Walsh looked at the horses again, particularly at the phantom brand on the bay's flank. I need to examine these animals. But Martha, I'm asking you as a friend, as someone who cared about Henry. Don't go looking for answers about where these horses came from. Sometimes the past should stay in the past. The past just showed up frozen outside my barn. Doc, I don't think it's interested in staying anywhere. Walsh opened the stall door and stepped inside, moving with professional efficiency now, despite his obvious discomfort. He examined the bay first, running his hands along its legs, checking its teeth, listening to its heart and lungs. Then he did the same with the grey. When he finished, he stood there for a moment, his hand resting on the grey's neck. These horses are healthy, Walsh said finally. Better than healthy. Their vitals are perfect. No signs of frostbite, no tissue damage from freezing. It's like they were just taking a nap in the cold. That's impossible, Sarah said. Yes, it is. Walsh stepped out of the stall and closed the door behind him, which is why this situation concerns me. Martha, has anyone else been on your property recently? Anyone you didn't recognize? Just Tom, and he stays on his side of the fence line mostly. Why? Walsh didn't answer directly. Instead, he walked around the stall, examining the horses from different angles. When he reached the bay's left side, where the phantom brand was most visible, he stopped. His hand went to his jacket pocket, and Martha saw him pull something out and slip it quickly into his palm. Before she could see what it was, he stepped closer to the stall rail, his body blocking her view. Doc, what are you doing? Just checking something. But his voice was strained now, and Martha saw his shoulders tense. When he turned back around, whatever he'd been holding was gone, tucked away in his pocket. I need to run some tests. Blood work, that sort of thing. I'll come back tomorrow with my equipment. You can do it now. I've got time. Tomorrow, Martha, I need to prepare. Walsh was already moving toward the barn door, his pace quicker than when he'd arrived. Keep them warm. Keep them fed. Don't let anyone else see them if you can help it. Doc, wait. Martha followed him outside. The afternoon sun was already sinking toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. What did you take from the stall? What did you find? Walsh stopped at his truck, his hand on the door handle. For a moment, Martha thought he might keep lying, might just get in and drive away. But then his shoulders sagged, and he turned to face her. There was something frozen in the bay's mane. A piece of leather. I recognized it. Recognized it how? It was from a bridle. A specific bridle that belonged to a horse Henry owned. A horse named Phantom. Walsh's voice was rough now, each word seeming to cost him something. That horse died in 1975, Martha. I was there when we buried it. The ground felt unsteady beneath Martha's feet. You're saying that horse in my barn is Phantom? That's not possible. You just said it yourself. That horse died 50 years ago. I know what I saw then, and I know what I'm seeing now, and neither one makes a damn bit of sense. Walsh climbed into his truck. I'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, keep this quiet, please. He drove away before Martha could ask any more questions. She stood in the cold, watching his taillights disappear down the road, trying to process what he'd told her. Sarah came out of the barn, her jacket pulled tight against the wind that had picked up. What was that about? He thinks he recognizes one of the horses. Says it's Phantom, your grandfather's old quarter horse. But that horse died before I was born. I know. They went back inside the barn. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and Martha adjusted the heat lamps, making sure the horses would stay warm through the night. As she worked, she watched the animals. They'd separated now, no longer pressed together. The bay, Phantom if Walsh was right, stood at the front of the stall. The grey had moved to the back, where the shadows were deepest. Martha remembered Phantom. Of course she did. Henry had loved that horse, had raised it from a foal, trained it himself. It had been a magnificent animal, smart and fast, with a calm temperament that made it perfect for working cattle. Henry had been devastated when it died. Some kind of colic, the vet had said. They'd tried everything, but the horse suffered too much. Henry had made the call to put it down himself, had been there when Walsh administered the injection. They'd buried it on the north side of the property, under a cottonwood tree. Martha had visited that grave every year on the anniversary of Henry's disappearance. The two losses were connected in her mind, tied together by grief and the cruelty of time. She'd brought flowers, had talked to the stone marker Henry had placed there. In some ways, it was easier to grieve for a horse than to grieve for a husband whose body was never found. "Grandma, look at this." Sarah was crouched near the stall, examining the floor. "The bay keeps pawing at this spot. See the marks?" Martha joined her. Sarah was right. Deep scratches in the old wooden floorboards, fresh enough that splinters still clung to the edges. The horse had been trying to dig through the floor. Why would it be digging here? Sarah ran her fingers along the scratches. Unless there's something underneath. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. She'd owned this barn for 50 years, had walked across these floors thousands of times. But she'd never thought about what might be beneath them. "Help me move them out." Into the next stall. It took some coaxing, but the horses were cooperative. Almost too cooperative, as if they understood what Martha was trying to do. Once they were secured in the adjacent stall, Martha found a crowbar in the tool shed. The floorboards were old, softened by decades of moisture and wear. They came up easier than she'd expected. Underneath was packed earth, frozen hard. But there was something else, a discoloration in the soil, a rectangular shape about 2 feet long and a foot wide. Sarah brought a shovel, and together they chipped away at the frozen ground. It took 30 minutes of work, their breath forming clouds in the cold barn air before the shovel hit something solid. Metal. A box of some kind, wrapped in deteriorated oilcloth. Martha's hands shook as she pulled it free from the earth. The box was heavy, made of steel that had rusted in places, but held its shape. There was no lock, just a simple latch that had corroded shut. The crowbar made quick work of it. Inside the box, protected by layers of plastic sheeting, were documents. Old papers, photographs, and a leather-bound journal. Martha lifted out the journal first, recognizing the cover immediately. She'd given it to Henry for Christmas in 1973. He'd said he wanted to keep better records of the ranch operations, breeding schedules and such. But when she opened it, she found no breeding records. Instead, she found names, dates, numbers that looked like payments. And scattered throughout, in Henry's careful handwriting, notes that made her stomach turn. Consortium meeting. Cannot proceed as planned. Safety concerns overruled. Another entry, weeks later. Inspectors paid off. JB says we proceed next month. And then months after that. God forgive us. The mine, what have we done? Sarah was looking over her shoulder, reading the same words. What mine? What is he talking about? Martha's mouth was dry. She flipped through more pages, seeing names she recognized. Dr. Emmett Walsh, James Booker, the father of the current sheriff. 3 other men, all prominent ranchers in the valley, all now dead. And more entries, increasingly desperate. They want silence. JB says the families have been compensated. But compensation doesn't bring back the dead. Grandma. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What did Grandpa do? Before Martha could answer, she heard a vehicle approaching. Fast, the engine loud in the quiet evening. She quickly closed the journal and shoved everything back into the metal box. They barely had time to replace the floorboards, covering the hole with loose straw, before Sheriff Ray Booker appeared in the barn doorway. He was a big man, 60s, with a face that had spent too much time in the sun and a gut that hung over his belt. He'd been sheriff for 20 years, appointed after his father retired from the position. Martha had always found him affable enough, if a bit lazy when it came to actual law enforcement. But the expression on his face now wasn't friendly. "Martha, heard you had some excitement out here today. News travels fast. Doc Walsh called me. Said you found some horses. Said they might have been abandoned on your property." Booker stepped into the barn, his eyes scanning the stalls until he found the horses. "Mind if I take a look?" "Yes, actually, I do mind. They're on my property, and they're not causing any harm." Booker's expression hardened. "Now, Martha, don't make this difficult. If these animals were abandoned, that's a crime. I need to document them. Maybe see if anyone's filed a missing livestock report. They weren't abandoned. They were frozen. Frozen. Solid ice. I found them this morning and brought them in to thaw." Booker looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Horses don't freeze solid and then just wake up, Martha. That's not how nature works. Then explain to me how these two are standing here, healthy as can be, after I chipped them out of a block of ice this morning." The sheriff moved closer to the stall. When he saw the phantom brand on the bay's flank, his face went pale. He stood there for a long moment, not saying anything, just staring at that mark. Then he turned back to Martha, and there was something new in his eyes, something that looked like fear. "Where did you find these horses, Martha?" Booker's voice had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that preceded storms. "I told you, outside my barn. And you didn't think to call me first? Before you brought them onto your property, before you disturbed what might be evidence." "Evidence of what exactly?" Martha stepped between the sheriff and the stall. "These are animals, Ray, not a crime scene." Booker's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Finally, he pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "I'm going to need to file a report. For the record, can you describe exactly where you found them and what condition they were in?" Martha gave him the information, watching his face carefully as she spoke. He wrote it all down with mechanical precision, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand tightened around the pen when she mentioned the phantom brand. "This brand," Booker said, not looking up from his notebook. "You're sure that's what it is?" "I know my own ranch's brand, Ray. That's the one Henry's father designed. The one we stopped using after Henry disappeared, 50 years ago. Yes. And you expect me to believe these horses have been carrying that brand for 50 years? That they're somehow the same animals from back then? I don't expect you to believe anything. I'm telling you what I found." Booker closed his notebook with more force than necessary. "Martha, I'm going to say this as a friend, not as a sheriff. Let this go. Whatever you think you found here, it's not worth the trouble it'll bring. That's the second time today someone's told me to let something go. First Doc Walsh, now you. Makes me wonder what you're all so afraid of." The sheriff's face flushed red. "I'm not afraid of anything. I'm trying to protect you from getting hurt over nothing. From chasing ghosts that should stay buried. Ghosts have a way of coming back when they've got unfinished business." Sarah, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Sheriff, do you know anything about a mining accident in 1974? Something involving a copper mine?" Booker's head snapped toward her. "That's ancient history. Nothing to do with these horses. Seems like a strange thing to bring up if it's got nothing to do with anything," Martha said. The sheriff looked between them, his expression caught between anger and something else. Resignation, maybe. The Whitewood mine closed in 1974 after an accident killed 2 workers. It was investigated. The mine was found to have structural issues and was permanently sealed. That's all there is to know. My grandfather was involved with that mine, wasn't he?" Sarah asked. "A lot of people were involved with that mine. It was the biggest employer in the valley before it closed." Booker moved toward the barn door. "I'll file this report about the horses. If anyone comes forward claiming ownership, I'll be in touch. Until then, they're your responsibility, Martha. Anything happens to them, it's on you." He left without another word. Through the barn window, they watched him sit in his truck for several minutes before starting the engine. He seemed to be talking to someone on his phone, his gestures animated, frustrated. "He's scared," Sarah said. "They're all scared. The question is, scared of what? Martha went back to the spot where they'd found the metal box. She pulled up the floorboards again and retrieved the journal, this time bringing it out into better light. Your grandfather wrote all of this. These dates, these names. It's a record of something that happened at that mine. They sat on hay bales near the horses, and Martha read through the journal more carefully this time. The entries started in early 1973, documenting meetings of something called the Whitewood Mining Consortium. 6 men, Henry Colby, Emmett Walsh, James Booker, Thomas Hendricks Sr., Robert Chen, and Marcus Whitewood. They'd pooled resources to reopen an old copper mine that had been closed since the 1940s. The early entries were optimistic. Geological surveys showed promise. Equipment was purchased. Workers were hired. But then the tone shifted. Structural engineers report concerning. RW says we can shore up the weak points. JB agrees, proceeding against recommendation. And later, inspector requesting additional safety measures. Cost prohibitive. EW knows someone who can make this go away. Martha's hands trembled as she turned the pages. This was her husband's handwriting, his words, documenting choices that led to something terrible. He knew. Henry knew the mine wasn't safe and they operated it anyway. Keep reading, Sarah said quietly. The entries became more sparse after that, just dates and brief notes. Then in October 1974, a longer entry. Collapse in Shaft 3. 2 men trapped. TH and RW went down to help. Only RW came back up. TH died before we could reach him. The other man, Peterson, crushed by fallen timber. We called it in. Federal inspectors coming. JB handling local authorities. We agreed on the story. Equipment failure. Act of God. No one's fault. But the next entry, written a week later, told a different story. Peterson's widow came to see me. She knows. Somehow she knows the truth. Says her husband told her about the safety violations, about how we ignored the warnings. She's threatening to go to the federal authorities. JB says we need to handle this. I don't know what he means by handle, but I don't like the sound of it. Martha stopped reading. Her throat felt tight, her chest constricted. She looked up at Sarah, who'd gone pale. This gets worse, doesn't it? I think so. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Martha forced herself to continue. The next entry was dated 2 weeks after the widow's visit. Money exchanged. Peterson's widow and Hendricks's wife both received substantial settlements. Signed agreements not to pursue legal action. Mine officially closed. Equipment sold. We thought it was over. Then nothing for months. The journal pages were blank until March of 1975. When Henry's writing resumed, it was different. Shakier, less controlled. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see Peterson's face. TH's widow looks at me like I killed her husband myself. Maybe I did. We all did. The money we gave them, it was blood money. And now JB says there's a problem. The widow kept records. Her husband kept records. Evidence of what we did. Martha's hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the journal. She remembered that spring. Remembered Henry's nightmares, the way he'd started drinking more, the distant look in his eyes. She'd thought it was stress from the ranch, from a hard winter. She'd never imagined this. The consortium met tonight, the next entry read. JB says the evidence needs to disappear. Says the widows need to understand the consequences of breaking their agreements. I told them I wanted no part of it. They reminded me that I'm already part of it, that we're all in this together. That if one of us goes down, we all do. Sarah stood up abruptly, walked to the barn door. Martha watched her granddaughter stand there, silhouetted against the fading daylight, her shoulders rigid. He was part of a cover-up. Grandpa was part of covering up murder. It was an accident. The mine collapsed. An accident they caused by ignoring safety regulations. An accident they knew could happen and let happen anyway, because fixing it would cost money. Sarah turned back, and there were tears on her face. And then they paid off the widows and threatened them to keep quiet. Martha wanted to defend Henry, wanted to find some way to make this less awful than it was. But the words wouldn't come. She looked down at the journal, at her husband's handwriting documenting his descent into guilt and fear. There's more. The final entries were dated in November of 1975, just weeks before Henry disappeared. I can't do this anymore. The weight of it is killing me. I told EW yesterday that I'm going to confess, going to tell the authorities everything. He said I'm being foolish, that it won't bring anyone back, that it'll just destroy our families. Maybe he's right about the families. But I can't live with this anymore. A week later, JB came to see me tonight. Said if I talk, Martha will be in danger. Said accidents happen. Said I need to think carefully about what I'm doing. I've never seen him like that, cold, hard, like he'd already decided what needs to be done if I don't stay. Quiet. The last entry was dated December 1st, 1975, 3 days before Henry disappeared. As dessen tusen sinch be. I've made my decision. Tomorrow I'm taking all the evidence I've gathered to the federal authorities in Cheyenne. I've got copies of the inspection reports we falsified, records of the payoffs, everything. If anything happens to me, I've arranged for the evidence to be sent to a lawyer I trust. Martha doesn't know any of this. I couldn't tell her. Couldn't put that burden on her. If this works, if I can make this right, maybe I can sleep again. Maybe I can look at myself in the mirror without seeing a coward and a killer. That was it. The last words Henry ever wrote in this journal. 3 days later, he drove out into a blizzard and never came back. Martha closed the book and sat there in the growing darkness of the barn. The horses were quiet in their stall, their presence somehow comforting despite all the questions they'd brought with them. After a long moment, she spoke. He was going to confess. He was going to turn them all in. And they stopped him, Sarah said. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? That the consortium killed him to keep him quiet. I don't know what to think, but that was a lie. Martha knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about James Booker's threat, about how accidents happen. She was thinking about a truck found empty on a snowy road, doors open, no body ever recovered. She was thinking about how convenient it had been for everyone when Henry was declared dead. The life insurance policy. That thought struck Martha with the force of a physical blow. Henry had taken out a massive life insurance policy just weeks before he disappeared. At the time, she'd thought it was responsible planning. They'd talked about wanting to make sure the ranch would survive if anything happened to him. The policy had paid out after 7 years, after he was legally declared dead. That money had saved the ranch, had kept her afloat through drought years and market crashes. But now she wondered, had Henry taken out that policy knowing he might not survive? Had it been his way of providing for her if his plan to confess went wrong? We need to find out what happened to the evidence, Sarah said. Grandpa wrote that he was taking it to federal authorities. If he did that before he died, there should be a record somewhere. Martha stood, her joints protesting after sitting still for so long. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years. It rang 4 times before a woman's voice answered. Whitewood Historical Society. Miriam speaking. Miriam, it's Martha Colby. There was a pause, long enough that Martha thought the connection had dropped. Then, Martha, hello, it's been a while. I need to look at some records. From 1975. Another pause. What kind of records? Anything related to the Whitewood mine closure. News articles. Investigation reports. Anything you have? Martha, I'm not sure those files are archived. It would take time to pull them. I can wait. I'll come by tomorrow morning. That's not what Look, some things are better left in the past. You of all people should understand that. Martha's patience snapped. That's the 3rd time today someone has told me to leave the past alone, Miriam. I'm tired of it. I'll be at the Historical Society at 9 tomorrow morning. You can either help me, or I'll find another way to get what I need. She hung up before Miriam could respond. Sarah was watching her with a mixture of concern and something that looked like pride. You don't do subtle, do you, Grandma? Not anymore. I'm too old for subtle. Martha looked at the metal box they'd found, at the journal sitting on top of it. We need to keep this safe. If what your grandfather wrote is true, if the consortium was willing to kill to protect their secret, they might still be willing to do the same. Most of them are dead. Most, but not all. Doc Walsh is still alive. So is Sheriff Booker, even if he wasn't part of the original group. And I don't know who else might have been involved, who else might have a reason to want this buried. They carried the box to the house, Martha moving carefully despite her urgency. The snow had started falling again, light flakes that caught in her hair and melted on her skin. Inside, she put the box in her bedroom closet behind old coats and boxes of photos. It wasn't much of a hiding place, but it would have to do for now. Sarah made coffee while Martha sat at the kitchen table, her mind churning. The coordinates from Henry's ring. The numbers on the grey horse's coat. They pointed to somewhere up in the mountains. Doc Walsh had confirmed that much. Near the old mining district. Sarah, can you look up those coordinates on your computer? See exactly where they lead? Sarah pulled out her laptop and typed rapidly. It's Grandma, it's not at the mine itself. It's about 2 miles west of where the mine entrance used to be. Middle of nowhere from what I can see on the satellite view. Just trees and rocks. Could be a claim marker. Or another entrance to the mine system. Or it could be where they buried something they didn't want found. The thought made Martha's stomach turn. But Sarah was right. If the consortium had killed Henry, if they'd made his death look like he got lost in a blizzard, they would have needed to dispose of his body somewhere it wouldn't be found. Somewhere remote, somewhere they controlled. Her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. Yes, heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, male, older, disguised somehow to sound rough and unfamiliar. Stop digging, Mrs. Colby. Stop asking questions. What's buried should stay buried. Who is this? Someone trying to save your life. You found the horses, fine, keep them. But leave everything else alone. Don't go to the Historical Society. Don't go up to the mountains. Just let it go. Or what? Or the same thing that happened to your husband will happen to you. The line went dead. Martha sat there, the phone still pressed to her ear, her heart hammering in her chest. Sarah had gone pale, clearly having heard at least part of the conversation. Grandma, we need to call the police. And tell them what? That someone made a threatening phone call. Ray Booker would take a report and do nothing. Worse, he might tell whoever made the call that we're not backing down. So what do we do? Martha stood and walked to the window. Outside, the snow was falling heavier now, accumulating on the fence posts and the bare branches of the cottonwood trees. She could just make out the barn, its shape dark against the white landscape. We keep going. We find out what really happened to your grandfather, even if it's dangerous, especially if it's dangerous, because that means we're getting close to the truth. Martha turned back to face her granddaughter. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to take photos of every page in that journal. Upload them to somewhere safe. One of those cloud storage things you're always talking about. You think they'll try to destroy the evidence? I think they already tried once, 50 years ago. I'm not giving them a second chance. Sarah spent the next hour photographing the journal, the documents from the metal box, everything they'd found. Martha watched, her mind working through the pieces of the puzzle. The horses, the brand, the coordinates, Henry's journal. They all connected, but she couldn't quite see how yet. When Sarah finished, Martha made a decision. I'm going to visit Tom Hendricks tomorrow. Before I go to the Historical Society, the neighbor, his father was Thomas Hendricks Sr., one of the consortium members, the one who died in the mine trying to save the other worker. Martha pulled out the journal again, found the relevant entry. Henry wrote that only Tom's father went down to help when the shaft collapsed. He died trying to save the other man. That's different from the others. That speaks to character. You think Tom might know something? I think if his father was the kind of man who'd risk his life to save someone, he might have told his family the truth before he died, might have left something behind. A confession, evidence. Martha closed the journal. And Tom's mother is still alive, in a nursing home in Casper, but still alive. Still coherent from what I hear. They ate dinner in relative silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Martha bundled up again and went out to check on the horses one last time. The barn was warm, the heat lamps doing their work. The bay, phantom if that's truly what it was, nickered softly when she entered. The grey remained in the shadows, watching with those unnervingly intelligent eyes. Martha stood at the stall door, studying the animals. "What are you?" she asked quietly. Where did you come from? And why now? Why, after 50 years? The bay moved closer, reaching its head over the stall door. Martha stroked its nose, feeling the warmth of its breath on her hand. The horse's eyes were calm, knowing, as if it understood her questions, even if it couldn't answer them. Then the grey stepped forward, and Martha saw the markings on its coat shift again. This time they formed not just numbers but letters, partial words that appeared and disappeared like smoke. She could make out fragments, find and truth, and something that looked like cabin. Her breath caught. She pulled out her phone and took photos, trying to capture the markings before they shifted again. But by the time she had her camera ready, the letters had faded back into ordinary horsecoat patterns. "I'm not imagining this," she said aloud. "You're trying to tell me something. Trying to show me something." The grey horse bumped its nose against her hand, a gesture so deliberate it couldn't be coincidence. Martha stood there for a long moment, then made a decision. Tomorrow she'd visit Tom Hendricks and Miriam Chen, but the day after she was going up into the mountains. She was going to follow those coordinates and see what was waiting there. When she returned to the house, Sarah had her laptop open, the screen filled with maps and satellite images. "I've been looking at the area around those coordinates. There's an old logging road that gets within a mile of the spot. It's marked as closed, but it might be passable with the right vehicle. Tom Hendricks has a four-wheel drive truck. If I can convince him to help, he could get us there. Us. You don't have to come." Sarah looked up from her computer, and Martha saw the same stubborn determination in her granddaughter's face that she saw in the mirror every morning. "Yes, I do. He was my grandfather too. I deserve to know the truth as much as you do." Martha wanted to argue, wanted to protect Sarah from whatever they might find up in those mountains. But she recognized that expression. Sarah had inherited more than just Henry's height. She'd inherited his determination, his unwillingness to let injustice stand. "All right," Martha said. "We'll go together. But first, I want to talk to Tom, see if he knows anything about what his father might have left behind." That night, Martha lay in bed, listening to the wind howl around the house. She thought about Henry, about that last night. Had he been afraid? Had he known what was coming? Or had he believed, right up until the end, that he could make things right? Morning came cold and clear. Martha was up before dawn, as always, coffee brewing before the sun touched the horizon. She'd slept poorly, dreams full of ice and horses and Henry's face the last time she'd seen him. He'd kissed her goodbye that morning, told her he had business in town. She'd asked if he'd be home for dinner. He'd said yes, but his eyes had been somewhere else, already focused on whatever he was planning to do. She pushed the memory away and focused on the day ahead. First Tom Hendricks, then the Historical Society, then, if she learned anything useful, a trip up into the mountains. Tom's property bordered hers to the east, a smaller spread but well-maintained. She could see his house from her kitchen window, a quarter-mile across the snowy fields. Rather than call ahead, she decided to walk over. The exercise would do her good, and surprise visits tended to yield more honest answers than scheduled ones. The walk took 20 minutes, her boots crunching through the crusty snow. Tom was in his barn when she arrived, working on a piece of equipment. He looked up when she entered, his weathered face registering surprise. "Martha, wasn't expecting company this morning. I need to talk to you about your father." Tom's hands stilled on the wrench he was holding. He was in his mid-50s, a solid man with his father's broad shoulders and his mother's sharp eyes. "My father's been dead for 50 years. I know. I also know he died trying to save another man when the Whitewood mine collapsed. That makes him different from the others." "The others?" "The consortium members. The ones who knew the mine was unsafe and operated it anyway." Martha pulled out her phone and showed him a photo of one of Henry's journal entries. "Your father went down into that shaft to help. He didn't have to. He chose to." Tom read the entry, his face going pale. "Where did you get this?" "I found it buried under my barn floor, along with a lot of other documents that tell a story about what really happened at that mine." Martha watched him carefully. "Your mother's still alive, Tom. Still sharp from what I hear. I'm guessing your father told her things before he died. Things about the consortium, about the cover-up. Tom set down the wrench and walked to the barn door, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My mother doesn't talk about those days. Says it's too painful. I understand painful. I've lived with it for 50 years. But now I have a chance to learn the truth about what happened to Henry, and I'm not going to let pain or fear stop me. You think the consortium killed him? I think he was going to expose them, and I think they had a lot to lose if he did. Martha moved to stand beside Tom. Your father didn't deserve to die in that mine. The other man, Peterson, didn't deserve to die either. They died because 6 men prioritized profit over safety. And then those same men covered it up, paid off the families, and threatened anyone who tried to tell the truth. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My mother has a box. She showed it to me once, years ago. Said my father gave it to her the night before he died, told her to keep it safe, told her that if anything happened to him, she should know the truth. Martha's heart beat faster. What's in the box? I don't know. She wouldn't let me see. Said it was too dangerous, that knowing the truth would only put me at risk. Tom turned to look at her. But if you're going after answers, if you're really going to dig into this, you should talk to her. She's at Sunshine Valley Care Home in Casper. I can call ahead, let her know you're coming. I'd appreciate that. Martha! Tom's expression was serious now. My mother told me something once. She said my father knew Henry was planning something before he disappeared. Said Henry came to see my father a few days before the blizzard, wanted to know if my father would testify if it came to that. My father said yes, and then Henry vanished, and my mother always wondered if his disappearance was really an accident. She thinks he was killed. She never said it outright, but yeah, I think that's what she believes. Martha felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. It wasn't proof. It wasn't evidence. But it was confirmation of what she'd already suspected. I'm going to Casper today. After I stop at the Historical Society, I'll call my mother now. Let her know you're coming. Tom hesitated, then added, Be careful, Martha. If you're right about what happened to Henry, then whoever killed him got away with it for 50 years. They might not appreciate you stirring things up now. The Whitewood Historical Society occupied a small building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a cafe that had been there since the 1960s. Martha parked out front and sat in her truck for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Through the window, she could see Miriam Chen moving around inside, organizing displays. Miriam was in her late 70s, a small woman with silver hair cut short and glasses that hung on a chain around her neck. She'd run the Historical Society for as long as Martha could remember, dedicating herself to preserving the town's past. But now Martha wondered what parts of that past Miriam had been helping to keep buried. The bell above the door chimed when Martha entered. Miriam looked up from the display she was arranging, her expression carefully neutral. Martha, you're early. I'm eager to see those records. Yes, about that. Miriam set down the photograph she'd been holding. I spent some time last night thinking about your request. The files you're asking for, they're part of a sensitive period in our town's history. Sensitive how? The mine closure affected a lot of families. People lost their livelihoods. There was grief and anger and a lot of pain. Some wounds, Martha, heal better when they're not constantly reopened. Martha stepped closer to the counter that separated them. My husband disappeared during that same period. His body was never found. I spent 50 years wondering what happened to him, grieving without closure. Now I have a chance to find answers, and you're telling me I should leave it alone because it might be uncomfortable for some people. Miriam's composure cracked slightly. It's not about comfort. It's about, there are people in this town whose families were involved in the consortium. Good people, Martha. People, you know, people who've lived with the weight of what their fathers did. Is exposing all that really worth it? Yes, Martha's voice was firm. Because if what I suspect is true, my husband was murdered to cover up a crime. And murder doesn't have a statute of limitations, Miriam. Not legally and not morally. You're talking about accusing people. Important people. The Booker family, for one. Ray's father was part of the consortium. You really want to drag that into the light?
I want the truth.
Whatever it is, wherever it leads. Miriam removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. I saw him that night, you know. Your Henry, the night he disappeared. Martha's breath caught. You told the searchers you hadn't seen him. I lied. Miriam sat down heavily in the chair behind her desk. I lied because Ray's father, James Booker, told me to. He was sheriff then. He came to my house the next morning, before anyone knew Henry was missing. He said I hadn't seen anything, hadn't heard anything. He said if I valued my family's safety, I'd remember that very clearly. Where did you see Henry? He was at the courthouse, late afternoon, going into the records office. He had a briefcase with him, looked determined. I was locking up the Historical Society and saw him through the window. About an hour later I saw him come out, but he wasn't alone. Who was with him? Miriam's hands were shaking now. James Booker and Emmett Walsh. They were on either side of him, and it didn't look friendly. They were walking him to his truck. Henry looked. He looked scared, Martha, and angry. They talked for a few minutes, heated conversation. I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then Henry got in his truck and drove off. That was the last time I saw him. Martha felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. And you never told anyone this? In 50 years, James Booker made it very clear what would happen if I did. He had power in this town, still does through his son, and I had a daughter to think about, a family to protect. Miriam's eyes were wet now. I'm not proud of it. I've lived with that guilt every day. But I was scared, Martha. I was terrified. The records office, what was Henry doing there? I don't know for certain, but the land records are kept there. Property deeds, mineral rights, that sort of thing. If he was building a case against the consortium, he would have needed proof of who owned what. Documentation. Martha's mind raced. Henry had been gathering evidence. He'd gone to the courthouse to copy records, and Booker and Walsh had caught him. They'd confronted him, threatened him. And then, that night, he'd driven out into a blizzard and never returned. The records he took. What happened to them? I assume they were in his truck when it was found. But the truck was empty when the searchers got to it. Everything gone. Convenient. Martha, please understand. I wanted to tell you. So many times over the years I almost did. But the fear, it never quite went away. Martha left the Historical Society with copies of newspaper articles about the mine closure, but the real value was in what Miriam had told her. Henry had been confronted, threatened, and whatever evidence he'd gathered from the courthouse had vanished along with him. The drive to Casper took 2 hours through winding mountain roads, still slick with snow. Sarah had insisted on coming, and Martha was grateful for the company. They drove in silence for much of the journey, both lost in their own thoughts about what they'd learned. Sunshine Valley Care Home was a low-slung building surrounded by bare trees and snow-covered gardens. Inside, it smelled like antiseptic and overcooked vegetables. A cheerful nurse directed them to room 217, where Eleanor Hendricks had lived for the past 3 years. Tom had called ahead as promised. Eleanor was waiting for them, sitting in a chair by the window with a blanket across her lap. She was 92, but still sharp-eyed, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun. She studied Martha as they entered, her gaze penetrating. "You look like him," Eleanor said without preamble. "You're Henry, around the eyes." That same determined look. "Mrs. Hendricks, thank you for seeing us. Call me Eleanor, and don't thank me yet. You might not like what I have to tell you." She gestured to 2 chairs. "Sit. My son says you found something at your barn. Something that has you asking questions." Martha explained about the horses, the journal, the documents. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression unchanging. When Martha finished, the old woman nodded slowly. "So it's finally coming out. I wondered if it would before I died. Part of me hoped it would stay buried. But another part, the part that loved my husband, that part knew the truth should be told. Tom said your husband gave you a box." "He did. The night before he went into that mine for the last time." Eleanor's hands tightened on the blanket. "Thomas knew something was wrong. He'd been arguing with the other consortium members for weeks. He wanted to shut down the mine. wanted to bring in proper engineers to shore up the weak sections. But the others, especially James Booker and Marcus Whitewood, they said it would cost too much, that they'd already invested too much to stop now. He went down anyway, Sarah said quietly. He was a good man, stubborn and proud, but good. When that shaft collapsed, when they said men were trapped, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his gear and went down. Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. Robert Whitewood came up. My Thomas didn't. Martha reached across and squeezed the old woman's hand. They sat in silence for a moment before Eleanor continued. That night, before it happened, Thomas came home early from a consortium meeting. He was angrier than I'd ever seen him. He said Henry Colby was right, that they'd all made a terrible mistake, that people were going to die if they didn't act. He gave me a metal box, said it contained copies of everything. The inspection reports they'd falsified, the safety violations they'd covered up, payments they'd made to keep inspectors quiet. He said if anything happened to him, I should hold on to it, that someday it might matter. Do you still have it? Eleanor nodded toward a closet. Top shelf. The blue metal box. Sarah retrieved it while Martha stayed with Eleanor. The box was similar to the one they'd found under the barn floor, about the same size and age. Inside were documents, yellowed with time but still legible. Inspection reports marked confidential, letters between consortium members discussing how to handle the safety problem, ledgers showing payments to officials, and photographs of the mine's interior showing cracks in support beams, water damage, unstable rock formations. This is evidence, Martha said, her voice shaking. This proves they knew. It proves they were criminally negligent. But it doesn't prove murder. Eleanor's eyes were hard now. But I can give you something else. Something that might. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, handled so many times it was soft as cloth. The day after Henry disappeared, I got a phone call. Anonymous, a man's voice I didn't recognize. He said Henry had made a mistake, that he'd tried to be a hero and paid the price. He said, if I valued my son's life, if I valued my own life, I'd keep my mouth shut about what my husband had told me. Then he said something I've never forgotten. He said they'd taken care of the evidence, that Henry's truck was clean, but there might be copies. He wanted to know if Thomas had given me anything. What did you tell him? I lied. Said Thomas hadn't told me anything, hadn't given me anything. The man said that was wise. Then he hung up. Eleanor unfolded the paper. I wrote down everything he said, word for word, right after the call. I knew someday it might matter. Martha read the page, recognizing the implications immediately. This was evidence of a cover-up, evidence that someone had taken things from Henry's truck, evidence of threats made after his disappearance. There's one more thing, Eleanor said. She reached into her bedside table and pulled out an old photograph, its edges worn from handling. This was taken at a consortium meeting, about a month before the collapse. Thomas took it without them knowing. He said he wanted a record of who was there, who knew what. The photograph showed 6 men seated around a table covered with blueprints and documents. Martha recognized Henry immediately, young and serious, his jaw tight with tension. Beside him sat Thomas Hendricks, Emmett Walsh, James Booker, Robert Chen, and Marcus Whitewood. But there was a 7th man in the photograph, standing in the background near a doorway. His face was partially shadowed, but visible enough to identify. Who is that? Sarah asked, pointing to the 7th man. That's Daniel Peterson, the other worker who died in the collapse. Thomas said he'd been at that meeting as a foreman, representing the miners' concerns about safety. The consortium dismissed everything, he said. 2 weeks later, he was dead. Eleanor's voice was bitter. They killed him as surely as if they'd pushed him into that shaft themselves. Martha studied the photograph carefully. Peterson looked angry in the image, his posture aggressive. This wasn't a man who was going to stay quiet about safety violations. His widow received a settlement according to Henry's journal. Blood money! And it wasn't enough to keep her quiet forever. Thomas told me that Peterson's widow, Karen, had started asking questions a few months before Henry disappeared. She'd found her husband's notes about the safety violations. She was talking about going to the federal authorities. What happened to her? She died in 1976, car accident on a mountain road. Lost control on a curve, went over the edge. Eleanor met Martha's eyes. Very convenient timing. The implications hung heavy in the air. Two people who tried to expose the truth. Two people dead under suspicious circumstances. Martha felt a cold fury building in her chest. How many lives had been destroyed to protect this secret? Eleanor, I need to ask you something. The coordinates that were on Henry's wedding ring. They point to a location up in the mountains near the old mine. Do you have any idea what might be there? The old woman's face went pale. Thomas mentioned something once. He said if anything went wrong, if the consortium ever came after him, he had a backup plan. He'd built a small cabin in a remote location where he could hide if necessary. He said only Henry knew where it was, that they'd agreed to keep it secret in case either of them needed it. A safe house, Sarah said. More than that. Thomas said they'd been storing copies of evidence there. A complete record of everything the consortium had done. He said if the worst happened, that cabin held enough information to bring them all down. Eleanor gripped Martha's hand. I think that's where your Henry was going that night. I think he was taking his evidence to the cabin, adding it to what was already there. And I think the consortium figured it out. Martha's mind raced. If Henry had made it to the cabin, if he'd stored the evidence there, it might still be intact. 50 years of proof just waiting to be found. But if the consortium had caught him before he got there, if they'd stopped him on the road... She pushed that thought away. There was only one way to find out. We need to go up there, Martha said. We need to find that cabin. Martha, no! Eleanor's grip tightened. If I'm right, if that cabin exists and has evidence, the consortium would have been watching it. They might still be watching it. Most of the consortium is dead, but their children aren't, their friends aren't, the people who benefited from keeping this secret quiet aren't. Eleanor released Martha's hand and sat back, looking suddenly exhausted. Promise me something. Promise me you'll be careful, that you won't go up there alone. I won't be alone. Sarah's coming with me, and I'm going to ask Tom to help. Good. Tom's a good man, like his father. He'll keep you safe. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. I've waited 50 years to tell someone this story. 50 years of carrying this weight? When I'm gone, these documents are yours. Use them, tell the truth. Let the whole world know what those men did. Martha and Sarah left the care home with the metal box and the photograph carefully packed. The drive back to Whitewood was quiet, both of them processing what they'd learned. The conspiracy was bigger than Martha had imagined, more deadly, more far-reaching. And if Eleanor was right, if that cabin existed and held the evidence they needed, then Henry's disappearance might finally make sense. But something else was becoming clear too. If the consortium had killed Henry to protect their secret, and if they'd killed Karen Peterson for the same reason, then Martha and Sarah were now in the same danger. They knew too much. They had too much evidence. And someone out there, someone who'd already proven willing to kill, knew they were getting close to the truth. They were halfway back to Whitewood when Martha's phone rang. She answered on the truck's speaker system. It was Doc Walsh, his voice strained and urgent. Martha, I need to see you tonight. It's about the horses. What about them? Not on the phone. Come to my clinic at 8. Come alone. Doc, if you have something to say, you can say it now. Sarah's with me, and she's as involved in this as I am. There was a long pause, then a sigh. Fine, but what I'm going to show you, what I'm going to tell you, it changes everything, Martha. Everything you think you know about Henry's disappearance. The line went dead. Martha and Sarah exchanged glances. That sounded ominous, Sarah said. Everything about this situation is ominous, but Martha's curiosity was burning now. What could Walsh possibly tell her that would change everything? She'd already learned that her husband was part of a criminal conspiracy, that he'd been threatened and possibly murdered. What could be worse than that? They reached the ranch with an hour to spare before the meeting. Martha checked on the horses first, as had become her habit. The animals were calm, standing close together again. But when Martha entered the stall, the grey horse moved toward her with deliberate purpose. It lowered its head and pressed its forehead against her chest, and Martha felt something, a warmth, almost electric, spreading through her body. Images flashed through her mind, not memories but visions. A cabin hidden among pine trees, A man sitting at a rough wooden table writing by lamplight. The man's face turned toward her, and Martha's breath caught. It was Henry, older, grey-haired, but unmistakably Henry, and he was alive. The vision ended as suddenly as it began. Martha stumbled backward, her heart racing. Sarah caught her arm. "Grandma, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I think I just did." Martha's voice was shaking. "Or something impossible." "I don't. I need to sit down." They went to the house, and Martha tried to explain what she'd experienced. How could she describe a vision that felt more real than memory? How could she explain seeing her husband alive when he'd been dead for 50 years? "The horses," Sarah said slowly. "They're not natural, are they?" "They can't be. The way they survived being frozen, the way the markings move on the grey's coat. Now this. They're showing you something, trying to tell you something, that Henry's alive. That's impossible. He'd be 98 years old. Even if he survived somehow, even if he didn't die in that blizzard." Martha stopped, her mind catching on something Eleanor had said. The cabin, the secret cabin that only Henry and Thomas Hendricks knew about. What if he didn't die? What if he made it to the cabin and stayed there for 50 years? Why would he do that? "To protect me." The answer came to Martha with sudden certainty. The consortium threatened him. They said if he exposed them, they'd hurt me. So he disappeared, made them think he was dead. And he's been up there ever since, waiting. Waiting for what? For them to die. For the threat to pass. For it to be safe to come back. Martha stood up, her decision made. "We're going to that clinic. We're going to hear what Walsh has to say. And then we're going up into those mountains." Doc Walsh's veterinary clinic was on the edge of town, a converted barn that still smelled faintly of hay and horses. His truck was the only vehicle in the parking area. Martha and Sarah entered through the front door, finding Walsh in his office. He looked like he'd aged a decade since yesterday, his face drawn and pale. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to chairs, but neither Martha nor Sarah sat. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," Martha said. "For once in 50 years, just tell me the truth." Walsh pulled a tape recorder from his desk drawer. It was old, the kind with actual cassette tapes. "Henry gave me this the day before he disappeared. He said if anything happened to him, if he didn't come back, I should wait. Wait until the time was right, until it was safe. Then I should give it to you. And you've had it for 50 years. You've let me grieve and wonder and suffer, and you had this the entire time. I was following his instructions. He was very clear about that. I was to wait until certain conditions were met." Walsh placed the recorder on the desk. "Those conditions have been met now. James Booker died last week. I was the last one left, and my doctor says I have 6 months at most. Cancer. It's spread too far for treatment." Martha stared at the recorder, her hands trembling. "What's on that tape?" "The truth about everything. About the mine, the consortium, and about what I'm going to do." Walsh pressed play, and after a moment of static, Henry's voice filled the room. Martha's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of the desk for support. That voice, she hadn't heard it in 50 years, but she would have recognized it anywhere. Sarah moved closer, her hand finding Martha's arm. "Martha, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't come back. It means the plan failed, or the consortium got to me before I could reach safety. I need you to know something first. I love you. I've always loved you. Everything I'm about to do, I'm doing to protect you." Martha closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Henry's voice continued, calm and measured, explaining the same story Martha had pieced together from the journal. The mine, the safety violations, the deaths, the cover-up and the threats. "They came to me 2 days ago, James Booker and Marcus Whitewood. They said if I went through with my plan to expose the consortium, you would have an accident. They were very specific about that. An accident that would look natural but wouldn't be. They said they'd already taken care of Karen Peterson, that her car going off that cliff wasn't chance. They said you'd be next if I didn't stay quiet." Martha heard her own small sound of grief. Sarah's grip on her arm tightened. "I can't let that happen. I can't risk your life, not even for justice. So I'm going to disappear. I'm going to make them think I'm dead. There's a cabin, coordinates I had engraved in my wedding ring. Tom Hendricks and I built it 5 years ago as a hunting shelter, but we stocked it for emergencies. I can survive there for as long as it takes. The consortium members are all in their 50s and 60s. Time is on my side. I just have to wait them out. No, Martha whispered. Henry, no. I've arranged everything. The life insurance policy will pay out after 7 years if they can't find my body. That money will keep the ranch going. Doc Walsh will check on you, make sure you're safe. And when it's finally over, when the threat is gone, I'll find a way to let you know. I'll send a sign, something only you would understand. Martha thought of the horses. The Phantom brand, the coordinates on the gray's coat, the vision of Henry alive in the cabin. The horses. You sent the horses. Henry's voice continued. I know this is asking too much. I know it's cruel to make you live without answers, to let you think I'm dead. But Martha, I need you to live. That's more important than anything else. More important than justice. More important than my guilt. More important than the truth. I need you to be safe and alive and happy, even if it's without me. There was a pause, a sound that might have been Henry crying. Then his voice came back steadier. The evidence is safe. Everything we need to expose them is hidden, where they'll never find it. Someday when this is over, it will come to light. The truth will be known. But for now, I need you to let me go. Don't search for me. Don't investigate. Just live your life, Martha. Live it fully. That's what I want for you. That's what I need. The tape went silent except for the soft hiss of static. Then Henry's voice came back one final time, softer now. I wish I could have been braver. I wish I could have stood up to them and protected you at the same time. But I couldn't see a way to do both. So I chose you. I will always choose you. I love you, Martha Colby. I love you with everything I am. The tape ended. The silence in the office was absolute. Martha stood there, tears running down her face, her whole body shaking with 50 years of grief and anger and love and betrayal all at once. He's alive, she said finally. He staged his death. He let me mourn him for 50 years, and he's been alive this entire time. Walsh nodded. I believe so. The horse is appearing now after all this time. It's the sign he promised. He's telling you it's safe now, that you can come find him. Or, Sarah said quietly, the horses are telling us where to find his body. If he died up there, if he didn't survive... Martha looked at the tape recorder, at this artifact of Henry's voice and his terrible choice. Then she looked at Walsh. Tomorrow. We go tomorrow. And you're coming with us. Martha didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table with Henry's tape recorder, playing his message over and over until she had every word memorized. His voice, the pauses, the breaks where emotion overcame him. She'd lived without this voice for 50 years, and now she couldn't stop listening to it. Sarah had stayed at the ranch, neither of them wanting to be alone with what they'd learned. In the morning, they made coffee and sat together in the grey pre-dawn light, not speaking much. What was there to say? Henry was alive, or had been alive, might still be alive at 98 years old, living alone in a mountain cabin for half a century. The idea was absurd. It was impossible. But Martha knew, with a certainty that lived in her bones, that it was true. She'd felt it in that vision the grey horse had given her. Henry was up there, waiting. Tom Hendricks arrived at 7 with his truck, a heavy-duty 4-wheel drive equipped for mountain roads. He'd brought supplies, ropes, flares, a first aid kit, emergency blankets. He'd also brought something else, pulling it from behind the truck's seat with careful hands. This was my father's, he said, showing Martha an old leather satchel. He gave it to my mother the night before he died. It has maps of the mine system and the surrounding area, including the location of the cabin he and your husband built. Martha took the satchel, feeling the weight of it. Inside were hand-drawn maps on yellowed paper, detailed and precise. She found the cabin marked on one, with notes in Thomas Hendricks' handwriting. Water source 200 yards north, root cellar under east corner. Emergency supplies cached in 3 locations. It was a survivalist's guide, instructions for long-term habitation. Doc Walsh arrived shortly after, moving slowly. He looked worse than he had the night before, his skin grey and his breathing labored. But his eyes were clear and determined. I made a promise to Henry 50 years ago. I'm going to keep it one way or another. They loaded the truck with supplies and prepared to leave. Martha had one more thing to do. She went to the barn, to the stall where the horses waited. Both animals were alert, watching her approach with that unnerving intelligence. "Thank you," she said to them, "for bringing me the message, for showing me the truth." She reached out and touched the bay's forehead. "Then the grey's, if he's up there, if he's still alive. I'm going to find him." The grey horse nickered softly and bumped its nose against her shoulder. Martha felt that same warmth spread through her, and with it came a sense of reassurance. The horses would be here when she returned. They would wait, just as they'd waited frozen in the ice for as long as it took. The drive up into the mountains was treacherous. The logging road Tom had mentioned was barely passable, overgrown with vegetation and blocked in places by fallen trees. They had to stop twice to clear the path, Tom and Sarah working with a chainsaw while Martha and Walsh rested. The altitude was getting to Walsh, his breathing increasingly difficult. "You should have stayed at the ranch," Martha told him, "and missed the end of this story." "Not a chance." Walsh managed a weak smile. "Besides, if Henry's up there, if he's alive, he'll want to see a familiar face. Someone who can vouch for what happened, who can explain why I kept his secret." They climbed higher, the pine trees growing thicker around them. Snow lay deep here, untouched by plows or traffic. Tom followed the maps carefully, navigating by landmarks that had probably changed in 50 years but were still recognizable. A lightning-struck tree, a rock formation that looked like a sleeping bear, a creek bed that ran year-round. Finally, as the sun reached its peak, Tom stopped the truck. It should be about a mile from here on foot. The terrain's too rough for the vehicle. They gathered their supplies and started walking. Martha moved with purpose despite her 73 years, driven by a need that transcended physical limitation. Sarah stayed close, ready to help if needed. Tom led the way, consulting the maps. Walsh brought up the rear, struggling but refusing offers of assistance. The forest was silent, except for their footsteps crunching through snow and their labored breathing. Martha kept her eyes on the trees ahead, searching for any sign of habitation. A trail, smoke from a chimney, any indication that someone lived in this remote wilderness. Then she smelled it. Wood smoke, faint but unmistakable. Someone had a fire burning nearby. "There," Tom said, pointing through the trees. "I see something." Martha's heart hammered in her chest as they pushed forward through a thick stand of pines. And there it was, a small cabin, weathered and partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, but solid and well-maintained. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Firewood was stacked neatly against one wall. Fresh tracks in the snow led from the door to what looked like a well or water source. Someone was living here. Someone was alive. Martha stood frozen, staring at the cabin. 50 years of wondering, of grieving, of living with absence had led to this moment. Her legs felt weak. Her breath came in short gasps that had nothing to do with the altitude or the hike. "Grandma," Sarah's hand found hers, squeezed gently. "Do you want me to go first?" "I can knock." "No." Martha's voice was steady despite the trembling in her body. "No, I need to do this." She walked forward through the snow, each step feeling both too fast and impossibly slow. The cabin was small, maybe 20 feet square, built from logs that had weathered to a silvery gray. The windows were covered from the inside, but she could see light around the edges. The door was solid wood, fitted tight against the frame to keep out the cold. Martha raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What would she say? What could she say to a man who'd let her believe he was dead for 50 years? Anger and love warred in her chest, both so intense she couldn't separate one from the other. She knocked. 3 solid raps that echoed in the quiet forest. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard movement inside. Slow, shuffling footsteps. The sound of a bolt being drawn back. The door opened a crack, and Martha found herself looking at an eye. Blue-gray, familiar despite the wrinkles around it. Henry's eye. "Martha?" The voice was hoarse, cracked with age and disuse, but unmistakably his. "Martha, is it really you?" "It's me." She didn't trust herself to say more. The door opened wider. Henry stood there, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. He was ancient, his face a map of lines and weathered skin, his hair completely white and long enough to touch his shoulders. But it was him. The shape of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly when he looked at her. All still there beneath the years. They stared at each other across the threshold. Martha saw tears start to run down his weathered cheeks. I didn't think I'd live long enough to... They're all gone. The consortium, all dead. The last one, James Booker, died last week. Henry's shoulders sagged with relief, so profound it seemed to take all his strength. He gripped the doorframe for support. Then it's finally over. Finally safe. Safe, Martha's voice cracked on the word. You've been up here for 50 years because you thought I'd be in danger. You let me think you were dead because you wanted to keep me safe. I had no choice, Martha. You have to understand that. They would have killed you. They told me they would, and I believed them. They'd already killed Karen Peterson. So you left me instead. You let me grieve and wonder and suffer for half a century because you didn't trust me to handle the truth? Didn't trust me to fight alongside you? Henry flinched as if she'd struck him. It wasn't about trust. It was about keeping you alive. And what about you? What kind of life have you had up here? Alone in this cabin, hiding like a fugitive, watching the years pass. Martha's anger was rising now, hot and righteous. Did you think about what it would do to me? Did you consider that living with uncertainty might be worse than any danger? Every day, Henry's voice broke. I thought about it every single day. But Martha, they murdered 2 people to keep their secret. 2 people we knew. How could I risk you being the third? Doc Walsh stepped forward then, his breathing labored. Martha, please, let him explain. Let him tell you everything before you judge. Martha looked at Walsh, then back at Henry. Sarah and Tom stood behind her, silent witnesses to this impossible reunion. Finally, she nodded. All right. I'm listening. Henry stepped back, gesturing them inside. The cabin was sparse, but surprisingly comfortable. A wood stove provided heat. A small kitchen area occupied one corner. A bed, a table, 2 chairs. Shelves lined one wall filled with books and supplies. And on the far wall, a collection of photographs. Martha stepped closer and felt her breath catch. They were pictures of her, hundreds of them taken over decades. Martha working in the garden. Martha on horseback checking the fence line. Martha at the town Christmas celebration. Martha sitting on the porch in the evening light. He'd been watching her. All these years he'd been watching. I hired someone, Henry said quietly. A private investigator from Cheyenne. Paid him in cash to check on you, take photos, make sure you were all right. Every month for 50 years, I got an envelope with pictures and a report. It was the only way I could. The only way I could bear it. Martha touched one of the photographs with shaking fingers. It showed her at 60, her hair just starting to gray, standing by the barn with a smile on her face. She remembered that day. Remembered feeling happy for no particular reason. You had someone follow me. Photograph me without my knowledge. Martha's voice was flat, carefully controlled. For 50 years, I needed to know you were safe. I needed to see your face, even if it was just in pictures. You could have come back. You could have told me the truth. We could have faced this together. And risked your life. Never. Henry moved to the table and sat down heavily, his age suddenly very apparent. Martha, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I need you to understand. The day I left, James Booker showed me a photograph. It was you, taken with a telephoto lens, standing in our kitchen. The message was clear. They could get to you anytime they wanted. They had already killed to protect their secret. I couldn't let them hurt you. Sarah spoke for the first time since entering the cabin. I'm Sarah, your granddaughter. Henry's head snapped up, his eyes going wide. Rebecca's daughter? Yes, you look like her. Like your mother. His voice broke completely then. I missed it all. Her wedding, her life, When did she die? 5 years ago. Cancer. Henry closed his eyes, and Martha saw grief wash over his face. Their daughter. He'd never known she'd died. Never got to say goodbye. The weight of what his choice had cost them all pressed down on the cabin like the snow outside. Doc Walsh pulled out a chair and sat, his breathing ragged. Henry, there's something else you need to know. The horses. The ones you arranged to be preserved and released. Martha found them. I knew she would. It was time. With James Booker dead, I knew it was finally safe to send the signal. How? Martha asked. How did you preserve them? How are they alive after being frozen solid? Henry smiled faintly. There was a Shoshone elder who lived near here. He taught me techniques his people had used for centuries. Methods of preservation that science doesn't understand. The horses were already old when I left, my two favorites. I couldn't take them with me, but I couldn't leave them to die either. So I used what he taught me, put them into a kind of suspended state, and buried them in ice, in a place I knew you'd eventually find them. When the time was right, when it was safe, they would thaw and guide you to me. That's impossible. So is a man surviving alone in the mountains for 50 years at his age. Yet here I am. Henry looked at his hands, gnarled and spotted with age. I'm 98 years old, Martha. I've lived far longer than I had any right to expect. The elder, he gave me other knowledge too. Ways to stay healthy, to survive, I think. I think he knew what I was doing. Knew I was hiding. He never asked questions, just helped me. Tom Hendricks cleared his throat. My mother sends her regards. She kept the evidence your father gave her. It's all safe, all documented. Thomas, Henry's eyes filled with tears again. Your father was the best of us. The only one who tried to do the right thing. I'm glad Eleanor survived. Glad she kept the records. We have everything, Martha said. Your journal from under the barn. The documents Eleanor kept. The tape you gave Doc Walsh. We have enough evidence to expose the whole conspiracy. To clear the names of the men who died. To bring justice, even if it's 50 years late. Henry nodded slowly. There's more here. In the cabin, I've kept copies of everything. Every document, every piece of evidence. It's all here waiting. I was going to send it to the authorities once the last consortium member died. But I needed to see you first. To explain. To ask for forgiveness I don't deserve. Martha looked at this old man, this stranger who wore her husband's face. She thought about the 50 years they'd lost. The life they could have had together. The choices he'd made, right or wrong, that had led them here. Martha walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, the forest stretched in all directions, white and silent. She'd imagined this moment countless times over the years. Finding Henry alive, getting answers, understanding what happened. But she'd never imagined the complexity of emotions that would come with it. The anger, the relief, the grief for all the lost years, the betrayal, the love that had somehow survived 5 decades of absence. Show me, she said finally, turning back to face Henry. Show me the evidence. Everything you've kept here. Henry rose slowly and moved to a section of the floor near the wood stove. He pried up a board, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a metal box, larger than the ones Martha and Eleanor had found. Henry lifted it out with difficulty, his aged muscles straining, and placed it on the table. Inside were files, dozens of them, meticulously organized and labeled. Martha began pulling them out, laying them across the table. Inspection reports with falsified signatures. Letters between consortium members discussing how to handle the safety problem. Photographs of the mine's interior showing structural damage. Payment records documenting bribes to local officials. And more, so much more. A complete paper trail of criminality spanning years. This is everything, Henry said. Every crime they committed. Every law they broke. Every life they destroyed. I've kept it safe, kept it hidden, waiting for the day when it could finally come to light without putting you in danger. Sarah was photographing the documents with her phone, her fingers moving quickly. This is enough to reopen investigations, to bring charges even if the men responsible are dead. Their estates could be held liable. The families of the victims could finally get justice. Justice. Martha spoke the word quietly, testing its weight. Is that what this is about now? After 50 years? It's about the truth, Henry said. About making sure what they did isn't forgotten. About honoring the men who died because of greed and negligence. And what about us? Martha's voice rose. What about the life we could have had? The years we lost? Is the truth worth that price? The cabin fell silent. Doc Walsh coughed, a wet, painful sound. Tom looked away, giving them privacy in a space too small for real privacy. Sarah stopped photographing and watched her grandmother with concern. Henry met Martha's eyes. "No, it wasn't worth it. Nothing could be worth what I took from us. But Martha, I need you to understand. When James Booker showed me that photograph of you in our kitchen, when he told me how easy it would be to make your death look like an accident, I saw my father in my mind. I saw him teaching me about the ranch, about honor and duty and protecting what matters most. And I knew that keeping you alive was more important than anything else. More important than the truth. More important than justice. More important than my own happiness or yours. You didn't trust me to make that choice myself. No, I didn't. Because I knew what you'd choose. You'd choose to stand beside me, to fight with me. You'd choose courage over safety. And that courage would have gotten you killed." Henry's hands were shaking now. "I was a coward, Martha. I admit that. I chose to hide rather than fight. I chose to live in exile rather than risk losing you. And I've paid for that choice every day for 50 years. But I'd make the same choice again. Because you're alive. You got to live your life, raise our daughter, meet your granddaughter. You survived. And that's worth everything else." Martha felt tears running down her face. She wanted to scream at him, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But she also understood. That was perhaps the cruelest part. She understood exactly why he'd made the choice he did, because she would have made the same choice to protect him. "I can't forgive you," she said. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did, the years you stole from us, the grief you caused. I can't just let that go because your intentions were good. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to understand. I do understand. And I hate that I do." Martha wiped her eyes roughly. "But we're here now. We have the evidence. So what do we do with it?" Doc Walsh spoke up, his voice weak. "We tell the story, all of it. The mine, the deaths, the cover-up, Henry's sacrifice. We make sure the truth is known. And then?" Sarah asked. "Then we let people decide what justice looks like after 50 years. Tom moved to stand beside Martha. "My father's name gets cleared. The men who died are remembered properly. And maybe, just maybe, something good comes out of all this tragedy." Henry pulled another item from the hidden compartment. A leather-bound book, thick and worn. "I wrote it all down, every detail. A complete account of what happened, who was involved, what they did. It's my confession and my testimony. Everything anyone would need to understand the full story." Martha took the book from Henry's trembling hands. The leather was soft with age, the pages filled with his careful handwriting. She opened to a random page and read, "July 14th, 1982, 7 years since I left. Martha was declared legally dead today, according to the investigator's report. The insurance money came through. She'll be able to keep the ranch now. I should feel relief, but all I feel is the weight of what I've done. She thinks I'm dead. In a way, I am. The man she married died the day he chose cowardice over courage." She closed the book, unable to read more. "You've been up here alone writing this?" "Writing helps. Keeps me sane. Gives me purpose." Henry gestured to the shelves lined with journals. "I have 50 years of entries, documenting everything. My thoughts, my regrets, my observations of the world from this isolation. The investigator brought me newspapers, magazines. I've watched the world change from a distance, powerless to be part of it." "You chose that powerlessness," Martha said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Anger was exhausting, and she was so tired. Tired of carrying grief, tired of searching for answers, tired of the weight of 50 years. Doc Walsh coughed again, this time doubling over with the force of it. When he straightened, there was blood on his handkerchief. Sarah moved to help him to a chair. "Doc, you need a hospital." "I need to finish this first." Walsh looked at Henry. "I kept your secret. I watched over Martha like I promised. I made sure she was safe, that the consortium never had reason to threaten her. I've carried that burden for 50 years, Henry, and now I'm dying. I need to know it meant something. I need to know we're going to finish this." "We will," Henry said firmly. "We'll take everything to the authorities. Federal prosecutors, the press, whoever will listen. The consortium's crimes will be exposed. The families of the men who died will finally have the truth. And what about you?" Martha asked. "You're legally dead. Coming back after 50 years will raise questions. There will be investigations, possibly charges, fraud for the insurance money. Who knows what else? I don't care about that. I'm 98 years old. Whatever consequences come, I'll face them. I just need to know that you're safe. That my decision to disappear, wrong as it was, accomplished that one thing. Sarah had been quiet, absorbing everything. Now she spoke, her voice thoughtful. There's another way to tell this story. A way that protects Grandpa while still exposing the truth. Everyone turned to look at her. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photographs she'd been taking. I'm a journalist. I know how to frame a narrative. We tell the story of the Whitewood Mine conspiracy. We expose the consortium's crimes, the deaths, the cover-up. We use all this evidence, but we tell it as a historical investigation, pieced together from documents that were recently discovered. We don't reveal that Grandpa is alive. We say the documents were found by Martha, which is essentially true. The horses led her to them. But Henry's testimony, Tom said. His confession, that's part of the evidence. We present it as a document he left behind before his disappearance. His account of what he knew, what he was planning to do. It makes him a hero who was trying to expose the truth and paid with his life, which in a way he did. The man Martha married did die that day. What's left is someone else. Henry was shaking his head. No, I won't hide anymore. I won't let Martha take the risk of protecting me. It's not about protecting you, Sarah said. It's about strategy. If you come forward alive, the story becomes about you. About the insurance fraud, about why you stayed hidden. It distracts from the real crime. But if we tell it as Martha discovering evidence of a 50-year-old conspiracy, the focus stays where it belongs. On the men who died, on the crimes that were committed. Martha saw the logic in it. She also saw what Sarah wasn't saying, that having Henry officially alive would complicate everything. Their marriage, the ranch that Martha had run alone for 50 years, the life she'd built in his absence. How could they untangle 50 years of legal and personal complications? There's something else, Tom added. If Henry stays legally dead, the statute of limitations on fraud doesn't matter. Martha can't be charged with collecting insurance money for a husband who's alive if legally he's still dead. It protects you both. This is wrong, Henry said. I should face the consequences of my choices. You have faced them, Martha replied, surprised by her own words. You've faced them for 50 years in this cabin. You've paid your price, Henry, and maybe this is the way it has to end. Not with you coming back from the dead, but with the truth coming to light in a way that honors what you tried to do. Doc Walsh nodded weakly. It makes sense. Tell the story through the evidence. Let Henry remain a man who tried to do the right thing and disappeared because of it. But what about us? Martha asked Henry. If you stay dead, what are we to each other? What happens now? Henry's face crumpled. I don't know. I don't have the right to ask anything of you, Martha. I gave up that right 50 years ago when I chose to leave. You chose to protect me. You chose wrong, but you chose out of love. Martha moved closer to him, really looking at this ancient man who'd once been young and strong and hers. I can't pretend the years didn't happen. I can't go back to being the woman I was when you left. And you're not the man you were either. We're strangers now, bound by history but separated by time. I know, but Martha took a breath, steadying herself. But maybe we don't have to decide everything today. Maybe we can start by just being honest, by knowing the truth, by having this chance that we thought we'd lost. Sarah was crying quietly now, watching her grandparents navigate this impossible reunion. Tom looked away, respecting their privacy. Doc Walsh sat with his eyes closed, his breathing labored but steady. Henry reached out slowly, giving Martha time to pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, he took her hand. His skin was papery thin, his grip weak, but his touch was familiar in a way that transcended time. I missed you every single day, every moment. I'd look at your pictures and try to remember your voice, your laugh, the way you'd hum while you worked in the garden. I'd try to remember what it felt like to hold you, to wake up beside you, to simply exist in the same space. I grieved you, Martha said, her voice breaking. I buried you in my heart 1,000 times. And then I'd remember something, some small moment, and I'd have to grieve you all over again. The grief never ended, Henry. It just changed shape over the years. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. Martha squeezed his hand. And I'm sorry too. Sorry that we're meeting again like this, both so old, with so much time behind us, and so little ahead. Sorry that we can't have back what was taken. They stood like that for a long moment. Two old people holding hands in a mountain cabin, connected by a love that had somehow survived 50 years of separation and silence. Finally, Martha spoke again. We'll tell the story Sarah's way. We'll expose the consortium's crimes. We'll clear the names of the men who died. And you'll stay here, stay hidden, stay legally dead. But I'll come back. I'll visit. We'll have whatever time is left. That's more than I deserve, probably. But it's what I'm offering. Martha released his hand and turned to the others. Sarah, you'll write the story. Tom, you'll help us get all this evidence organized and delivered to the right people. Doc Walsh. She looked at the old veterinarian, seeing how much pain he was in. Doc, you need to get to a hospital. I need to finish this first, Walsh insisted. I need to see it through. You have seen it through. You kept Henry's secret. You watched over me. You brought me that tape when the time was right. Your part is done. Martha's voice was gentle but firm. Let us take you home. Walsh nodded, too weak to argue further. Tom moved to help him stand. I'll drive him down. Come back for you all tomorrow. No, Henry said. Martha should go with you. She shouldn't stay here. It's not. We need time to figure this out, to understand what happens next. Martha wanted to argue, wanted to say she'd just found him and wasn't ready to leave. But he was right. They needed time, needed space to process everything that had happened. 50 years of separation couldn't be undone in a single afternoon. I'll come back, she said, in a few days, after we've had time to think, after Sarah starts working on the story. We'll figure out what comes next together. Henry nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. I'll be here. I've gotten good at waiting. They gathered the most important documents, the ones they'd need to start exposing the conspiracy. The rest would stay with Henry, safe in his hidden compartment, until they were ready for them. As they prepared to leave, Martha took one last look around the cabin. This had been Henry's home for 50 years, his prison and his refuge. 3 weeks passed like water through cupped hands. Sarah wrote her story, crafting it carefully to expose the truth while protecting Henry's secret. The article ran in the state's largest newspaper first, then got picked up nationally. The Whitewood Mine Conspiracy, they called it. A tale of greed, negligence, murder, and a 50-year cover-up that had finally come to light. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The families of Daniel Peterson and Thomas Hendricks received formal apologies from the state. Civil lawsuits were filed against the estates of the consortium members. A memorial was planned for the miners who died, their names to be engraved in stone and placed at the entrance to the sealed mine. Sheriff Ray Booker resigned quietly, his family's legacy tarnished by his father's crimes. Doc Walsh died peacefully 2 weeks after their return from the mountain, his conscience finally clear. At his funeral, Martha spoke about friendship and the weight of secrets, and how some men carry burdens that slowly kill them. The ranch settled back into its rhythms, but everything felt different now. The horses remained in their stalls, seemingly content. Scientists came to study them, baffled by their condition and the impossibility of their survival. Martha let them run their tests, but revealed nothing about the Shoshone elder or the preservation techniques Henry had learned. Some mysteries, she decided, deserved to stay mysterious. Martha visited the cabin twice more. She and Henry talked for hours, sharing the decades they'd lost, learning who they'd become in the years apart. They didn't try to recapture what they'd had. That was impossible. But they found something new, a companionship built on honesty and acceptance, on understanding that love sometimes requires impossible choices, and that forgiveness is a journey rather than a destination. On her third visit, Martha brought something with her. A letter she'd written at her kitchen table late one night, when sleep wouldn't come and memories felt too heavy to carry alone. She read it to Henry as they sat by his wood stove, the mountain wind howling outside. The letter spoke of anger and grief, of love that persisted despite everything, of years lost and moments stolen. It spoke of a young woman who'd married a rancher and built a life full of hope, and an old woman who'd learned that truth was more complicated than she'd ever imagined. It called for accountability, but also for healing, for remembering the past without being imprisoned by it. "I'm going to publish this," she told him, "as an open letter to the community. My final word on everything that happened." Henry read it silently, tears tracking down his weathered face. When he finished, he handed it back to her. "It's perfect. It's exactly right." They sat together in comfortable silence until Martha had to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Next time I come, I'm bringing proper coffee. That instant stuff you have is terrible." Henry laughed, a sound she hadn't heard in 50 years. "I'd like that." The drive down the mountain was easier now, the path familiar. At home, the horses greeted her with soft nickering. She stroked their noses, thanking them again for the message they'd carried across impossible years. That evening, Martha sat on her porch as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow gold and pink. Sarah joined her, sitting in the chair that had been empty for so long. "Do you think you'll ever truly forgive him?" Sarah asked. Martha considered the question. Forgiveness wasn't simple, wasn't a single moment of decision. It was choosing again and again to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past. "I don't know," she said finally, "but I'm learning that maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. Maybe it's about acknowledging the pain while choosing not to let it define everything else." She looked at her granddaughter, at the ranch that had been her anchor for 50 years, at the mountains that held secrets and truth in equal measure. Some ghosts needed to be remembered, not buried. Some stories demanded to be told, no matter how long they'd been hidden. "We can't get back what we lost," Martha said quietly, echoing words she'd spoken before. "But we can choose what we do with what remains." The snow began to fall, gentle and clean, covering old tracks and making way for new ones.